Hello, I'm Joan Brown. It's my great pleasure to host this segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame show. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted over 140 Marin women of distinction, women who have made immense contributions to the County of Marin and its residents, as well as to the world beyond. Honorees have distinguished themselves in many fields: education, science, business, philanthropy, the arts, politics, law, philosophy, religion, and more. Each honoree has been a force for positive change in our community. It's a great privilege to acknowledge and document their contributions. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Amy Reisch, who's being honored for the 2020 Hall of Fame. So let's begin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's begin. Tell us about your family and your childhood, and who were the influences in your life, and kind of paint a picture for us about that.
Okay. So the biggest influence in my life is my parents. My dad died in 2003, but my mother is still very much alive. She will be 99 in July. She is every bit as feisty and sharp and passionate as she's always been. And what I learned from my parents, who were both brilliant and who were both incredibly generous and loving people, was that it's not enough to talk about your values, but you have to live your values. And they did that every day in every way. And they made sure that my sister and I had experiences that reinforced those values. And so as my childhood went on, and I was exposed, of course, to many different kinds of values that existed in our society, the constant commitment of my parents, their willingness to take risks, their standing up for what they believed in, was what had the most impact on me, far more than, I don't even know what to call it, far more than the words that teachers would say or other children would say, etc. We had a kind of tumultuous beginning to my life. My parents were, you said that the word that you liked was McCarthyized. And I suppose that's a good word. So I was born just prior to the McCarthy period in Omaha, Nebraska. After my father had finished social work school in Pittsburgh, he decided to be a social worker after being stationed in India during the war. And that experience really changed the way he thought about work and what he wanted to do with his life. And he got a job in Omaha, Nebraska after social work school. And we only lived there for 18 months. And then we moved to Connecticut, where he was hired by the University of Connecticut School of Social Work. And by the way, my mother always worked all my life. Worked when they were in Pittsburgh, worked after I was born, etc. And we moved to Connecticut. And in Connecticut, the McCarthy period really was in full swing, and my father was targeted along with a couple of other faculty members. There was a lot of pressure put on the university to fire him. There was a lot of harassment of colleagues, etc. And my parents decided that they needed to find something else, and my father found a job in Providence, Rhode Island. We went there. That lasted for about a year. They were continuously harassed in Providence. The FBI would come to the house almost every other week.
And this was because of their outspoken political
Because
views?
of their activism around civil rights, around banning nuclear weapons, around actually starting in high school supporting the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in the fight against the fascists in Spain. And Providence became difficult as well. And finally, he was accepted into the doctoral program at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work. And the dean there was a fierce, feisty woman, one of the few women deans, who basically told the FBI to get lost. And so we were there in Philly for the biggest part of my growing up. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania. The thing that my parents really gave to me was a sense of myself in the world, as an actor in the world. And that being an actor in the world required that I really stick to my values and my principles. And that's really what I learned.
And so then you lived near Washington?
Oh, I moved a lot as an adult too. So after university, I moved out to California. I graduated from the university in 3 years through no fault of my own. They changed. I thought I was going to be a senior, and I got a notice saying, oh, we've changed the requirements for graduation. Congratulations, you're finished. So I didn't know what to do. I was planning to go to school. My father was invited to be a scholar at the Center for Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, so my parents were out here. So I came out here. I lived out here for a year and a half. I joined a very radical political organization, was a bit of an outside agitator at Stanford, and worked in the phone company organizing women in the union to have a little better say in our working conditions and in the union. And then I moved again back to Philadelphia. And I worked in a research program at a university. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And then I worked at a summer camp, met my ex-husband, went on to social work school, and many, many jobs after that. But we lived in upstate New York, then we lived in New York, then we lived in Baltimore, then we lived in a lot of places.
So, during your childhood, your family, your whole family, your parents, kids, were involved in a very progressive summer camp.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So that was the second biggest influence in my life. This was a camp when my mother was working at the United Electrical Workers Union in Pittsburgh. And there was a gentleman who was an educator.
So was she a social worker too?
No. When she was 21, she was the assistant editor of the American Scholar magazine, the Phi Beta Kappa magazine.
Wow.
She was a woman who was born too early. If she had been born at a later date, she would have gone on to a really quite amazing career as a writer and editor. That didn't happen, but she still did a lot of interesting things. In 1947, right after the war, my parents worked at a summer camp called Woodland that was started by Norman Studer, who was an educator in New York City. And he was a very progressive man and wanted a place where different kinds of people from different backgrounds and different points of view and different approaches to life could come together, share experiences, learn from each other within a framework of very progressive values of inclusion and equity and anti-racism, etc. This camp that he founded was Woodland, and my parents worked there in 1947 when they were still kids. And they made a deal with Norman that when they had children, they would come back and work at that camp if their children could go free, because they knew they wouldn't be able to afford it. So for 3 summers, my sister and I attended Woodland, and it was an absolutely transformative experience.
So this was like when you were 10, 11, 12?
10,
something?
11, 12.
And how was it transformative? What did you learn?
I learned, it's hard to say, to put into words what I learned. But maybe if I describe what the camp was like, it'll be clear what I learned. So for example, Pete Seeger came every summer, and he taught us songs from all over the world. He brought performers from all over the world that we got to sit down with and talk to and learn from. The first group of African American college students who did the sit-ins in the South came up to camp in the summer and talked to us about their experiences and helped us understand the risks that they were taking. We had, the music director was the man who wrote the song Strange Fruit. So there were many different kinds of kids of many races. There were counselors of many races, of many backgrounds from all over the world. It was a remarkable experience.
So listening to you, it sounds like your parents held those same values, and this was an extension of that and an enrichment of that.
Yes,
So
it was important to them that because where we lived for a variety of reasons and because of our own privilege,
Right.
even if we weren't wealthy, we were white, and
Yes.
that gave us privilege. We wouldn't necessarily have the experiences to reinforce those values just by living daily lives. They had to make an effort
Right.
for us to learn that.
So clearly you are a very value-driven person. What words, how would you name them? What would you call what your values were, and how have these values affected your work and your professional life and your leadership style?
How would I define my values? I would say compassion, respect, justice, inclusion, dignity, equity, a real belief in the value of every human being. And those values, I hope, have informed the decisions I've made about what work I do and how I do the work. And if we're talking about leadership style, I would say that I hope that my leadership style reflects those values. I know I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes, many mistakes. And that's part of my leadership style, I hope, is to say I was wrong, or to be able to own those mistakes and to own my own biases when they're pointed out and to learn from them. I try to be as inclusive and as generous with myself as a leader as I can. And I try to step back and follow when I need to do that.
Wow.
I try.
Something that you had mentioned that I found really interesting, that when we were talking earlier, was about how that some people's leadership is ego-driven, and how you really want yourself and others to check their ego at the door, and listen
always
carefully.
Some ego.
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what happens so often is that leaders rise from groups, and they find themselves in those positions, and they are looked to for making decisions or for providing guidance, et cetera. And sometimes that becomes what they want to maintain. And we kind of, and can kind of forget that it's the goal that everybody is working on that's important, not the leader, and not the leader's experience. And that's what I meant by ego-driven, that you have to step away from that.
So you've held many leadership positions throughout your career. What are the challenges and rewards in leadership?
So as I said when we were talking about this, that's kind of a funny question, because I think every leadership experience is both challenging and rewarding. It is the nature of leadership, I think.
And have you found that the things that have been the most difficult or the most challenging have often ended up being the most rewarding?
Yes.
When you get to a positive end? Yeah.
And even when you don't.
Yeah.
Because I think a true leader, or a good leader, if you will, learns from every experience, and from every positive experience, certainly, but from every negative experience. And the challenges that you face as a leader are, it's kind of I think it's a funny word, because if something that you're working on with a group of people is challenging, it's not just challenging for the leader.
Yeah.
It's challenging for everybody.
Right.
So we're all learning in that situation.
So maybe here's the time to kind of go through where you've done this. You began with Pac Bell, and you've had quite a litany. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that you your education was sprinkled in, and so on and so forth. So kind of what's your path
run through
been?
my chronology.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to go into great detail, but yes. So when I finished college, I worked at Pac. I worked before that, but
And you finished,
where do you want me to start?
Well, your college was social work at Hunter College.
No, that was graduate school. That was graduate
all right.
school. So Pac Bell was before graduate school and
Okay.
after college. Anyway, and then I had another little job, and then I went to graduate school in social work.
Okay.
And following that, I worked in drug treatment programs. I worked on psych units. I worked in what I will call direct services for a number of years. And then when I was 31, I believe it was, I got my first executive director job, which was actually quite shocking to me. And in fact, I was sitting in my office one day, and one of the staff people called up and said, that she would like to take vacation on such and such a day. And I said, well, yeah, okay, sure. And I hung up, and I thought, well, why is she asking me? And I realized, oh,
I'm the boss.
I'm responsible for that. Anyway, that was a wonderful learning experience. I did that for about 7 years.
And what was
an alternative model mental health family service agency in
where?
Columbia, Maryland, a planned community, in Jim Rouse's first planned community. And then I went from there to a job out here in California, because we moved. And I ran the Jewish Family and Children's Services Peninsula branch for 1 year. And then I ended up running the YWCA
Our very organization.
6.5 years. and it was the YWCA San Francisco, Marin, San Mateo at the time. And I remember the Women's Hall of Fame events and planning them. And Ann Kennedy was the director here in Marin at the time. And
Yes, and
I remember all of
yes.
that work. And then after the YW, I knew that we were moving back east. I was ready to move on from the YW, so I spent a year after being on the board of the United Way as vice president of the United Way's new Northern California Community Services Council. Then I went back east. I worked at the University of Pennsylvania and ran a mentorship program for women doctors in the clinical program who had to publish and be practicing doctors and manage a family and had virtually no supports. And we started a mentorship program. And then I moved back to California. And after
With your 2 daughters?
No.
Oh.
So this was now 1999. So my daughters had grown up out here, gone to college, etc. I came back to California in 99, and I did some consulting work, and then I found First 5 Marin. And I have been there for a very long time.
Which is a blessing for them, I'm sure. So can you talk a little bit about First 5 and what it is and what you do and why it's important?
Yeah, I think First 5 it was created by Prop 98, that was, not 98, Prop 10, that was passed in 1998. And it was a tobacco surtax, and all the proceeds are to be used for the optimum development of children prenatal to 5 and their families. And so we distribute Marin's portion of tobacco surtax money on behalf of children 0 to 5 and their families. But more importantly, First 5 is the voice for our youngest and most precious assets in this country. Given the rapid brain development in a child 0 to 5, 85% of the brain is developed by age 5. And if we...
Why don't you say that again?
85% of our brains are grown by the age of 5. And if we don't pay attention from pregnancy through age 5, really pay attention, and as a society provide the supports that the families and the child need and the community needs for that child to thrive, we as a society are going to pay the price. And that's what First 5 is about. It's not just about programs, it's about understanding how important that beginning is.
So First 5 itself does not do direct service.
No.
So would you explain?
We fund programs, we support programs, we convene, we provide technical support, we provide funding for some programs and services. We do a lot of advocacy, we do policy work, we work on a state level, on a local level to try to make sure that policies that tear down the barriers that are structural and systemic are in place. We try to work, this commission is very clear about the systemic issues that we need to address as a community, not just programmatic issues.
And do you see progress?
Yes. Right now, in these days, it's really difficult because a lot of that progress is being undermined.
Yeah.
But yes, there is progress. There is a much greater awareness of the needs of young children. There is a much greater commitment certainly on a state level with this new governor.
Are there
to those
First
children.
5s all around the state?
Every county has a First 5 commission.
Were you the first ED there?
I'm the first ED in Marin.
Executive director?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm the first. There was a person on loan from the Department of Health and Human Services part-time before I was hired, but I am the first and only director in Marin so far.
So I'm guessing that a lot of what you're doing is communicating with young families about what they need to do with these, with
well,
language and reading and
yes,
and all of those kinds of things.
That's part of it. I'm sure a lot of the people have seen the ads, the Talk, Read, Sing ads.
Yes.
That's done by the state commission. There is a state commission as well. What we do locally is support those folks who are working with families to do that.
Right.
So we provide that.
Well, I think it's some of the most critical work that needs to be done, and now's a tough time to be doing it. So speaking of that, what would you like your legacy to be?
I guess I would like my legacy broadly beyond Marin, but just in all the things that I've done, to be that I contributed to making changes that impact the systemic and structural nature of the disparities in our society. Just contributed, just made some changes. Nothing grandiose, but that by living my values and principles, which really are aimed at working towards a more just and equitable world for myself and for my children and for my grandchildren. I hope that I'm remembered for that, and I hope that in Marin in particular, with First Five, working to create different ways in which all of the folks working on these issues work together.
Yes.
And continuing to work together in a collaborative and open and equitable way to change conditions for people who have been marginalized or ignored for too long.
So this leads us into our final question.
Okay.
Your hopes for the community specifically, and what do you think are the greatest needs?
My hopes for the community is that Marin has so many wonderful people who are committed to changing this world to a more just and equitable place. And I hope that all of those people can find common ground to work together outside of their very specific jobs to really fundamentally change the way that we work with, the way we live with each other in this county, so that as we move forward, we think as a county of all of our residents being as important as we are.
Do you see steps in that direction being taken?
I do. I see a lot of steps being taken. And I think this county, it has tremendous possibility.
Well, it's a big order, isn't it?
It is.
It's a big order. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, Amy.
And thank the YW for this incredible honor. Really, it is humbling.
Well, you certainly deserve it. I mean, there is no question. You have been a trailblazer from childhood. So thank you for sharing stories from your incredible life with us, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in.